Last, because privately I call this the How Dare You Summit. How dare you? How dare you upset the order? How dare you step out of your crease and summon us all?
Hello, black brothers and sisters. I hope you're all doing fine. Now, I'm sharing this clip of Motley, the Barbados Prime Minister. She comes out to criticize world leaders like Emmanuel Macron, the President of France, and the US government for failing to address key issues that are affecting black diasporans. Now, she actually comes out to say how biased their systems are, that the black continent, I mean Africa and the Caribbean, have always been on the receiving end for mistakes that they have not committed. And she comes out to say this must end and everyone must be held accountable and responsible. So let's watch this video, then have a quick discussion at the end of it. Thank you so much.
We come to Paris today with a heavy heart, but with hope. We come to Paris today not to reinforce the divisions of the past, the orders of the past, but we come to Paris to identify the common humanity that we share and the absolute moral imperative to save our planet and to make it livable. We don't need a lot more words today. And quite honestly, I don't know that I have it in me to give more words. As I speak to you, my country, that of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and others in the Caribbean, in the Eastern Caribbean, are under a tropical storm watch for Tropical Storm Beth, literally. Yesterday, I had to decide whether to stay or to go. And I chose to stay because it is important that we move to action. Behind Tropical Storm Beth is another system. And hence, this is our new reality. We have heard this morning from Vanessa. We've heard from the economists. We've heard from the president of Niger. And everyone has spoken truth with feeling, with clarity. And Emmanuel, I've left you for last because privately I call this the How Dare You Summit. How dare you? How dare you upset the order? How dare you step out of your crease and summon us all to this inflection moment that will determine whether we will have the capacity and the will to bring pace and scope to the problem. I can tell you that there has been movement. Yes, 9 months ago, no one was speaking about natural disaster clauses. Now we have people wanting to recognize the wisdom of it because countries do need to pause debt payments if they are going to house and feed people who are victims of a climate crisis. Doesn't quite work as well for those who have to move people who are suffering from drought, as the president of Malawi has had to do. So we need to perfect it. 9 months ago, no one was talking about multilateral development bank reform at scale. And Ajay, the World Bank was not as forceful in its commitment to the crisis of climate as it is now. And we wish you all the best because in your hands lies the need for pace and scope. 9 months ago, we were not prepared to discuss issues of debt. And Kristalina, when no one else was stepping up during the pandemic, yes, you led the way, recognizing that your duty was not only to deal with the symptoms of the balance of payments problems, but to go back to the treaty and its underlying objective of securing growth and macro and financial and economic stability. But what is required of us is not simply to mark a card for progress. As we heard from Vanessa, what is required of us now is absolute transformation and not reform of our institutions. And that transformation is required because while the world knew since the 1890s that we were facing the warming of the climate, we chose not to heed the advice of scientists. And that which could have been done in more than a century is now being reduced to be done in less than a decade. And Secretary General, my heart bleeds for you, because yours has been almost that constant voice in the wilderness. But I say to you that it has not been in vain. As you heard from President Macron this morning, there is now the beginning of the understanding that poverty and climate cannot be separated. That education and climate cannot be separated. And later today we will go into the details of what that action must look like, much of which we have put in the Bridgetown Initiative, not because we believe we have the answers alone, but simply because we had the will to pull people together and say, let us discuss these issues and let us make enough noise consistently to command the attention of those who must speak and who must act. I ask us today not to leave Paris without understanding that the bolstering of the political ambition that is required must secure transformation and not reform. And I ask us to ensure that those of us who are heads of government and heads of state recognize that the world cannot continue in the shadow of an old imperial order that does not see countries, does not feel countries, does not hear countries, and worse, does not see, feel, or hear people. I ask us today to recognize that we cannot come to Paris but let our directors go back to the IMF or the World Bank and it be business as usual. They do not act in their own interests. They act on behalf of our sovereign states. And that is why we speak not only to the need for money, we speak to the need for the reform of the governance systems. Because when these institutions were founded, our countries did not exist. And we speak for a complete transformation of securing the sources of capital, as unpopular as it might be to voice it. We do not ask for the bankruptcy of private companies. That's not our wish. But we do ask for everybody to share the burden so that we can share the bounty. And it therefore means that simply relying and holding only governments accountable has run its course. And what is necessary now is for us to bring to the table also multinational corporations whose balance sheets dwarf more than 2/3 of the world's states. That is the world we have created out of the last century. And if we don't recognize that they cannot be left out of the equation, I'm coming. If they don't recognize that they cannot be left out of the equation, then we have no desire to solve the problem. And we thank philanthropy for what they do. But it can't only be what they like. It has to be what the world needs. And I hope that we leave Paris, therefore, not only secure in our determination to protect the planet, to protect the biodiversity, to protect people, but to recognize that if we do not act today at scale, with pace, we will not be able to get there in time to save more people. Let us, as the representatives of our people, at this most unique time in the history of civilization, not only do the right thing, but do it in time and do it for the right reasons. We will have more time in the next day and a half to discuss the details. But my plea simply now is to step up the pace and let's get going.
Regrettably, there are too many people dying in conflict as a result of the economic crisis. And the hand that we must lend to life comes in the decisions that we must make to reform and to fight for peace, not to fight to sustain war, wherever it is found across this world. To fight for reform so that our citizens are not made victims of poverty because of the triple crisis of climate, of pandemic, and indeed now of the conflict that is leading to the inflationary pressures that leads, regrettably, to people taking circumstances into their own hands.
On the lack of reform of the United Nations Security Council.
Earlier this week, President Biden spoke of the need to reform the Security Council. We call and echo for that, but we go further because we believe that a Security Council that retains the power of veto in the hands of a few will still lead us to war, as we have seen this year. And therefore, the reform must not simply be in its composition, but also be in the removal of that veto.
As Motley called for international financial institutions and the private sector to do more to support development towards ending poverty, which is goal 1 of the SDGs, while calling for a global compact on long-term financing.
But I want to simply say that if companies, multinational companies, have contributed to the global public risk or benefit from the solutions for global public goods, then they ought to contribute to their resolution through a percentage, a small percentage of their profits, funding the needs of countries, whether it is in the issue of climate, stability and resilience and adaptation, whether it is for the protection of biodiversity, both on land. There are people who are very proud. And we know, as I did and said when I addressed your parliament, that we were an Akan-speaking nation in the 17th century, that many of our people owe their inheritance to this great nation. And it is that spirit of resilience that you have shared with us that has come through the centuries in spite of the horrors of slavery. That for us, on 166 square miles, land means everything. And therefore, not just the possession of land, but the ownership of land must matter. That in our country, and I say so conscious that here in the Cape Coast, education has been critical to you in this part of Ghana. Equally, education is a bedrock upon which our nation has grown and has become more stable and prosperous. I say to you that it is our mission to erase poverty from our landscape, because poverty is a cancer that takes away from our people the right to choose and the right to be. And I share with you two simple things that perhaps say it better than I could ever say it. For when we became an independent nation, and the President of the United States of America, Lyndon Johnson, offered to pay our dues to join the Organization of American States, the then Prime Minister and Father of Independence, the Right Excellent Errol Barrow, said to him, Mr. President, where I come from, if you cannot afford to pay the dues, you do not join the club. That is who we are as Barbadian people. And when he went to deliver the first message on behalf of our people at the United Nations, he indicated something that has remained our motto and our bedrock, and which serves us well today, even as we comment on the crisis in Ukraine, that we shall be friends of all and satellites of none. This is a spirit which was imbued in us, and we have no doubt that that spirit owes its heritage to right here where I speak today, in the continent of Africa, because that is what allowed us to keep our heads high in spite of all that we had to face. Today, as we go forward, we simply use the words, as I've had to do over the last 4 years in my country, as we ourselves face serious economic difficulties and challenges, as we face the climate crisis and the pandemic. And what were those simple words? Simple that our children understand. Many hands make light work. And just as we are prepared to share the burden of adjustment always, we must be prepared to share the bounty that can allow our people always to aspire and to feel that they live as owners in their own country and not tenants in the land. My friends, I ask us once, please, before we go and I close, to reflect on the fact that it was from this coast, regrettably, that many people left. Yes, never to return at that time, but with a wish always in our bosom that their children and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren would come back to this land. We are conscious it is emotional. We are conscious that those who put your family in those castles, those horror houses, whether here or in Goree, did it because they simply did not see you, hear you, or care for you, and did it solely for the purpose of profit and solely for the purpose of power and dominion. It is regrettable that those same motives are showing themselves on the landscape of the world today. And if ever there is a people who can speak out against it with a moral authority, if ever there is the capacity for global moral strategic leadership, Mr. President, it must come from those of us who are affected on both sides of the Atlantic, those of you who lost brothers and sisters, and those of us whose great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents suffered the indignity of being treated less than human. We have come to this point today to say to these young people who sit opposite me that it must never happen again. And to ensure that it shall never happen again, we shall build monuments that you shall never forget. And it is therefore with pleasure that I share with you today that one of your own distinguished citizens, Sir David Ajay, has been the person responsible for designing the monument in Barbados, the country that has had, regrettably, a relationship with racism that is a blot on our history. The parliament which I lead, regrettably, was a parliament that in 1661 passed the slave code that came to spawn all of the other laws that govern slaves in the Americas. It is for that reason that we, the children of independence, have an obligation to build a monument such that these young people shall never forget the scars of history. And that monument shall pay tribute to 570 slaves buried in the burial ground at Newton Plantation in the parish of Christchurch, Barbados. We shall equally build there a genealogical research center so that we can truly understand who and who is exactly family. Because Barbados has the second largest transatlantic slave records in history, only to be exceeded by the United Kingdom, whose ones perhaps may not be as pristine as ours for different reasons. The monument that he has designed shall have 570 timbers standing tall. And we ask you, Mr. President, as we shall ask many of the other countries from where we have come and where we have gone to supply us with some of those timbers, so that your presence always shall be remembered by the people of Barbados whenever they visit that Barbados Heritage District at Newton Plantation. I end simply on this last point. The discussion of reparations can never be an easy discussion. It is complex. It is difficult. The heads of government of the Caribbean community have assigned me the responsibility of writing the heads of government of those European states whose governments were responsible for the extraction of wealth from our countries for centuries, and who extracted wealth, I dare say, from your continent and your countries too. There are those who will say and remind us that the specter of war makes it an inconvenient time to have this conversation. But may I say that it is never the wrong time to do the right thing. And I therefore hope that we shall have the support of Africa in these difficult and complex conversations that regrettably have led to the extraction of wealth for centuries from our nations in the Americas. Thank you, my brother. My friends, we come to you today conscious that we have returned. We have returned. And it is the ultimate victory to wage against those who said that there shall be no return, that I stand here as a daughter of the Americas, a daughter of Africa, to congratulate you on what has been a magnificent display this morning by your armed forces, by your civilian persons, by the school children of this country. And may I say, as I saw the stiltmen and the masqueraders, Mr. President, just as you felt when you inspected our troops in Barbados that you were in Accra, I feel today that I am in Bridgetown at Cropover when I saw the masqueraders and I saw the stiltmen move through this stadium. It is a reminder always that we are truly family. So let us not look north. Let us look west and let us look east. And let us be determined always to remove the middleman, to remove the middle leg, and to remove the middle passage. For if we remain committed and focused on that, then I believe that we shall be that humanizing force that the world needs now more than ever in these great times of peril in which we live. For we will know what we must do to bring justice to the fight against climate. For we shall know when the next pandemic comes how to fight it and who to protect. Mr. President and the people of Ghana, I leave you today confident that you shall continue to light a beacon for those of us not only in the continent of Africa but across the world, and we shall join you in holding that beacon, that everlasting fire, if only because it is a moral and just fire. It is a moral and just fight that we wage, but we are equally conscious that those who labor in a great cause, my brothers and sisters, shall never fail. Long live the Republic of Ghana. Long live the Republic of Barbados. Long live the Caribbean civilization. Long live the civilization of Africa. Ghana, I leave you today confident that you shall continue to light a beacon for those of us not only in the continent of Africa but across the world, and we shall join you in holding that beacon, that everlasting fire, if only because it is a moral and just fire. It is a moral and just fight that we wage. But we are equally conscious that those who labor in a great cause, my brothers and sisters, shall never fail. Long live the Republic of Ghana.
Now, the Prime Minister of Barbados, Motley, is telling the Western countries, and more specifically is talking to France and the United States, to stop whatever they are doing to black people around the world. Now, she comes out to criticize the Western governments and to say how much black people have been oppressed. Now, we know most of the times she makes her speeches during the UN climate summits because she is ambassador number one of the climate change. But however much she talks about the climate change, she always have a glimpse of whatever is happening to black people. It's happening to black countries and to the black continent. Now, black brothers and sisters, there is need for us to address things that affect ourselves, things that affect our brothers and sisters in the diaspora and those ones in the continent of Africa, because I feel like we've been oppressed for the longest time. We have had no one to talk on our behalf. That the only time that someone can listen to us, the only time someone can pay attention to whatever we are saying is when they have fully exploited our mineral resources. That's when they can hear and talk about us. It is coming a time when we don't just want to be heard, or we just don't want to be seen. We want to be seen and heard at the same time. We just do not want to go to these summits, talk and talk, but we have nothing to take back to our people. We have no changes. Now, we've been talking about black liberation for the longest time, but I feel like it is a topic, just like any other topic, that people talk about and then it is left without any meaningful conclusions. That black leaders around the world have not even managed to unite themselves to talk about common things that affect black people. How many times have we seen systematic racism running down the United States, in Europe, but the leaders in Africa have never united to talk about these things because they feel like it is none of their business. And this is why we keep on saying we need a systematic change in our political forums. We need a systematic change in the economic forums that we have. That we've been talking about the same thing. We've been fielding the same candidates, the same democratic candidates that have gone in bed with the oppressor. That the democracy that we believe in has instead harmed us a lot. That we believe in democracy that has deteriorated our own economy, our own sovereignty, our own democracy. What democracy kills democracy? And this is why the Western countries have always supported democracy, because they know in democracy, chaos survive. In democracy, that's when exploitation of our mineral resources comes in. That in democracy, that's when they have managed to loot and dismantle the peace that we had for the longest time. That in the democracy that they believe in the democracy that they have brainwashed us to believe in, that's when they have perpetuated their rogue policies in Africa. It is time we talk about all these things happening to us. It is about time we talk about the atrocities that the black person is undergoing in the world. It is about time we address the division amongst black people. Why do we have 55 countries in Africa? Why do we have so many islands in the Caribbean that do not associate or do business with the other? Instead, they associate and do business with the US and France, leaving alone their neighbors, leaving alone their brothers and sisters. That in Africa, we still use the dollar. Despite the US being miles away, we still use the euros despite Europe being miles away, we still use their currencies, we still use their languages, we are being taught their history. Now, I was doing my research, and Tim Wise, one of the most known scholars who have always been against the systematic racism that is taking place in the US. Now, in one of his viral clips, he says that even the black man doesn't know his own history, that the black man relies on the white man to teach him or her their own history. And when someone, your oppressor, is actually telling you where you came from, is telling you your culture, the way of life, how economic and social and political you have been all these years. Now, such like information comes with a lot of distortion, that you receive second-hand information, which have been which comes with a lot of errors, and someone can easily manipulate you, someone can easily brainwash you. This is why leaders like Motley is coming out to tell the US government, stop it. We black people can do it ourselves. That you don't have to do everything for us, because even the WHO is very unfair on how it dealt with COVID-19. Even the IMF, International Monetary Fund, is very corrupt, and it's very biased, because we've seen a high interest in Africa. They give you a loan of $10 billion, but the interest is very crazy. And this is why we say in Africa, we need to review and revise all these things, that we can have our own monetary bank in Africa, which is funded by African countries or the African continent, which in due diligence gives back loans to every state in Africa. Then the interests are not as crazy as they are with the IMF. So, black brothers and sisters, I hope and I feel like this is the time. This is the time we should talk about black unity. This is the time we should address things that are very important to black people and to the black unity that we've been talking about. Thank you so much for having taken your time to watch this video. I appreciate so much. One love.